Before we get started, I want to share with you something that we are extremely excited about here at This Week in Health IT, and that is Clip Notes. Clip Notes is the fastest growing email list that we've ever put together. If you can't listen to every show, but you want to know who was on and what was said, the best thing to do is to sign up for Clip Notes. One paragraph summary, key moments in bullet point format with timestamps, and 1 to 4 video clips from the show. It's a great way for you to stay current, share insights with your team, and maintain your commitment to their development during these extraordinary times. The best way to sign up, the easiest way to sign up is to just send an email to ClipNotes, CLIPNOTES, at thisweekinhealthit.com, and it'll kick off an automated workflow. You'll get an email back from me, click on that link, and you are off to the races. So don't delay, send that email, get signed up today. Now onto the show. Welcome to This Week in Health IT. My name is Bill Russell, healthcare CIO coach and creator of This Week in Health IT, a set of podcasts, videos, and collaboration events dedicated to developing the next generation of health leaders. This episode and every episode since we started the COVID-19 series has been sponsored by Sirius Healthcare. Now we've exited that series, but Sirius has stepped up to be a weekly sponsor of the show through the end of the year. Special thanks to Sirius for supporting the show's efforts to develop the next generation of health leaders. Today, we are joined by Lucie Ide, PhD, MD, Dr. Lucie Ide, founder and CEO of Rimidi. Good morning, Lucie. Welcome to the show.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
So Rimidi, I have Rimidi down as a health tech company focused on bringing personalized management to chronic health conditions. Elaborate on that a little bit. What is it that you guys do?
So we are really focused on the issue of how do we help, clinicians better use data when looking at these chronic diseases and sort of bridging from, protocols and population health type guidance to that individual patient who you're taking care of. And with the enormous amount of data being thrown at clinicians in their EMR from devices in the home, how do they make sense of that and make that really evidence-based, data-driven decision about patient care?
So you're bringing evidence-based guidelines and those kind of things. How do you interact? How do you interact with are you in the workflow of the EHR, or do you have your own digital tool? How do you interact?
Yeah, so early on when I started the company, EHR integration was a huge pain point in the industry, as I'm sure you know very well as a former CIO. And someone luckily put a bug in my ear about FHIR way before FHIR was a cool thing to talk about. And we became very early adopters of FHIR and sort of that concept, right, of a common API and standardized way to interface with EHRs, not just about the data, but about the actual user experience. So sort of the smart on FHIR piece of that. And how do you basically run an application like ours within the clinician's workflow? So, from my point of view, if a clinician never really knows that Rimidi is what's delivering this great product to them, I don't care. Our goal is for them to have the data, analytics and tools they need to deliver better patient care all within that existing workflow.
Yeah, and that's the problem. We talk about that a lot on the show, of the promise of technology fading into the background, right? Mm-hmm. So we're just enabling outcomes, enabling progress. What kind of outcomes are you guys seeing, and what kind of things do you measure in terms of the success of your implementations?
So as you mentioned, we're focused on chronic diseases like diabetes, heart failure, hypertension, obesity, et cetera. So we look at those clinical outcomes, but sort of the means to the end, right? How do you get to those clinical outcomes? It's where there's been the rub in chronic disease management for years, maybe decades, right? If you spend more money getting the better outcome, it becomes sort of a non-scalable, non-sustainable type intervention. So efficiency of workflow is a big deal. And I would say most recently with a big focus on remote patient monitoring and new reimbursement models, sort of driving that financial model, with the ideal situation being, clinicians and health systems can use technology that generates new revenue streams, drives more efficiency for their end users, and also better patient outcomes.
So when COVID hit, did you get a lot of requests to do something different than what was your core business? Was that a common thing?
Not necessarily different from our core business. Remote patient monitoring has been a part of our core business from the beginning. We've always, starting with diabetes, we've always been pulling in the blood glucose data into the workflow, mashing it up with EMR data to help drive this evidence-based decision making. But just like telemedicine, all of a sudden there was this explosion of how do we take care of these highly vulnerable populations remotely because we can't bring them into the clinic. So a lot of interest in the RPM capabilities, and because of some of the reimbursement changes that have happened under the public health emergency, a lot more focus on the billing for RPM.
So last question on this, because I'm really curious. So, we have a lot of data moving around. You're providing some, I don't know what the best word is for this, but you're providing intelligence around that data, and you're presenting that data at the right time, at the point of care and whatnot. Are you doing anything with regard to artificial intelligence, machine learning, to either look at the data during the clinical workflow or post-clinical workflow to enhance operation performance outcomes?
Yeah, so in the clinical workflow, right, one of the challenges with remote patient monitoring is the feeling by clinicians of don't just give me more data, right? Don't dump a bunch of patient-generated health data into my workflow. Help me know what to do with that. Who do I focus on? Which patients are highest risk of having an adverse outcome or having an ER visit? So we have a lot built into our rules engine that drives our clinical decision support pathways that really helps clinicians optimize for that efficiency of, who are the highest acuity, highest risk patients who need attention and intervention. And then, as you said, outside of that workflow, we are certainly building, analytics and algorithms to help them understand globally what the implications are. These protocols and guidelines can be incredibly complex, and they can be conflicted if, many of these patients have multiple chronic diseases. So you have diabetes guidelines, you have heart guidelines, you might have kidney guidelines. That's difficult for human beings to sort of optimize for that intersection. So we're really interested in that space of sort of optimizing that individual patient decision-making in the face of complicated and sometimes conflicting evidence.
So is that, you have what the clinician really wants from digital tools and digital transformation, and what patient really wants from the tools and transformation. Is it clarity of what I should be doing at this specific time, given the complexity of all the information and the complexity of my chronic condition? Is that what they're looking for, or how would you describe what the clinician and what the patient are looking for?
Yeah, I think the best way a clinician put it to me was make it really easy for me to do the right thing and make it difficult for me to do the wrong thing for this patient. And, I think we as patients, we're all patients at some time, right? That's what we want. We want to go to that trusted advisor of our, physician or other caregiver and have them make the best decision for us based on our unique circumstances and our characteristics as an individual. So I think those two are aligned.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Easy to do the right thing, hard to do the wrong thing. That's fantastic, especially with all the deluge of information that's coming at them. You have a phenomenal background. I probably should have started here, but I'd like to get back to it. So you have a phenomenal background, PhD, MD. So you would you classify yourself as somebody who's always wanting to learn more? That's why you ended up there, or you just went down one path and decided that there was another path? Give us a little background on how you end up a PhD, MD.
Yes, I started my career as a scientist, and I would say I probably am at the root of it, a scientist at heart, is a physicist working for the government, and then went into venture capital for a bit, and we can come back to that. And then really had a plan to, transition into academic medicine. So I did a dual MD PhD program with the goal of, having a career in a large academic medical center and running a research lab and seeing patients. And once I got into residency and really got a feel for what the actual practice of medicine is like and what actual hospital operations are like, I just became fascinated by all of the opportunity to make that work better, right? And sort of a systems level analysis of like, why do we do this way? And why haven't we changed in light of evidence, and sort of that endless why?
Yeah, the PhD in you, the scientist in you came out. You just kept looking, you looked at the hospital operation and you're like, this can be better. So, I'm curious about, Elon Musk talks a lot about using the scientific method. And is that essentially your approach? You have a hypothesis. You're like, we could do this better. I think if we do this, this will be better. Is that how you approach your company and your entrepreneurial efforts?
Yeah, and I think, often I get asked about being a physician and becoming an entrepreneur, and I actually think that scientific training is much more preparatory for shifting into entrepreneurship, because exactly, you see a problem, you create a hypothesis of, what's underlying that problem, how could you solve that problem, and then you just start to iterate on that. You try something, you gather evidence, did that work, did that not work, okay, let's change that little piece to see if we can get it to work better. And, in our journey, when we first launched a platform, it was standalone. And we had people who loved it, but said, I can't scale this across my organization if it's not integrated to the EMR. So then we start down that pathway. Okay, how do you do that? What is FHIR? What does that mean? What's the future? Right? And so it's sort of this endless peeling back layers of an onion.
Yeah. Well, when you're hiring now, do you look for people who have have a scientist kind of background, or are you pretty broad in terms of who you hire?
I think I look for people who are curious, right? Because at the end of the day, that's a common trait of a lot of scientists, is just fundamental curiosity and a willingness to explore things they may not know a lot about, and to sort of continuously learn. And so certainly when people join our team, it's like, this is a young, nimble company, and what we're doing today may be different than what we're doing 3 to 6 months. And you need to want to go on that journey with us.
I'm curious about tech debt. And, when you're first starting a company out, it's beautiful because it's greenfield, and, you can set things up and go in a lot of different directions. But as you start to progress, you get asked, your list of things that people are asking you to do gets pretty long. And then you have some legacy systems and those kind of things. How do you determine what you're actually going to do? I guess is the first question. And then the second, how do you handle tech debt as you mature as an organization?
Yeah, that is a tough one. And there's sort of what we call a cage fight that happens on our product roadmap session, where everybody comes in with their list of requests from clients, the list of requests from the tech team, the strategy requests of what they want on that product roadmap. And we really do have to sort of fight it out, figuratively, over what ends up on that roadmap. And one of the big issues is, when do you invest the time and resources in, moving past some of that tech debt. So we've really tried to, operate on really modern, future-facing architecture and stacks, and having people who don't come from healthcare is very helpful. And often when we're talking to IT teams at health systems, they're sort of, crying a few tears of jealousy when we talk about these, modern architectures that we work on, because it's things they don't often get to work on in their day-to-day life. But it's hard, right? I mean, it's the trade-off. Do we build the enhancement that the customer right now is asking for, or do we invest, months of dev in moving to, an updated platform and dealing with some of that tech debt? So it's just a trade-off.
What about the users? Do you have trade-offs from time to time where you're looking at and you go, hey, this is going to be really good for the clinician, but it might not be as good for the patient, or this might be really good for the patient, but the clinician is really going to hate putting this into the workflow? Do you have those kinds of trade-offs?
We have over time sort of really worked to understand the usability and those demands from the patient and the demands from the clinician. And certainly on the patient side, I truly believe, none of us want our health issues to dominate our day-to-day life, right? Just like clinicians want the technology to fade into the background, the patients do too. If I have diabetes or hypertension, I don't want to spend my day thinking about that. And so, we have scaled back. In some ways, what we try to ask of patients. We love cellular-enabled RPM technologies. Just step on the scale. Just take your blood pressure, the data, automatically goes into our platform, and you don't have to think about it. You don't have to pair to a smartphone with Bluetooth, which is frustrating. And so that's been our approach on the patient side of, how do we make this accessible and available? Our team is really committed to sort of the community health aspect as well of, years ago, I sort of set the expectation if we're not going to be a technology company that makes healthcare better for the 1%. I want to be a technology company that makes healthcare better for those who have the hardest time accessing healthcare. And so that influences a lot of what we think about in terms of accessibility, both price and technology of what we build for patients.
Yeah, and the sensors are really going there, right? I mean, the sensors, the cellular technology. I mean, one of the best things about 5G coming out is that 4G becomes less expensive and 3G becomes less expensive.
Right.
So we can now get these little sensors that we put in these things. I mean, is that what you envisioned, sort of the home of the future, where I sit down on a chair and it automatically takes a handful of readings and puts it into some sort of database? It's bad terminology, but anyway, but it brings all the data together about my health passively over time. Is that what we're envisioning?
Yeah, I do think we need to get to a continuous passive model of monitoring, right? And while today the cutting edge is using cellular-enabled medical devices like a glucometer, we all know that's going to go away at some point in the future. And whether it's, sensors embedded in the home, in my clothing, whether it's maybe at the next step, the sensors in smartwatches and phones, that's where we're going. And in fact, we're doing some cool and exciting work around COVID with continuous non-invasive monitoring and really the analytics of picking up deviation from personal baseline and flagging people who are displaying early symptoms and sort of warning signs of COVID.
Now, and you mentioned this earlier, and I've been in these meetings where the doctors were like, I don't want any more data. I mean, like, here's all the data. You figure out what it means. I mean, do something to it and just present me, these 3 data elements. That's all I really want to see. I don't want to see every time somebody sits on a chair, I don't want to see, their weight changed by 0.5 ounces.
Absolutely. They need the technology to distill it down to the actionable information for the physician. And then I think we all also have to continue to think about top of license practicing, right? What do we need physicians to do? Because only they can do it through their credentialing and their training. What can the rest of the care team do? And I think that concept is going to be further advanced as we move more into this continuous virtual model of care. And, everyone on the care team has a role to play there.
How do you get your best ideas? Is it from your clients? I mean, do you have like an advisory board of clients, or is it just by interacting with your clients? Is it help desk calls? I mean, how do you find the next ideas for your product?
Yeah, I would say it's mostly client and clinician driven. So both, clinicians who are at client sites and then sort of, formal and informal advisors who we have.
Yeah, that would make sense. All right. So I want to go back. I don't know how I ended up where I'm at, but I want to go back to your background. So you PhD, MD, you worked in venture capital, and let me add. This is a question I'm asked a fair amount. Is when's the right time for someone to look at venture capital, PE, angel investing, or bootstrap, no investing at all? Where do the different strategies really work the best?
I think depending on the stage of the company, what kind of product you're building, if you can bootstrap a technology and start generating early revenue and fund the company through that, I think that's a great mechanism. That's hard. If you're building clinical software that needs to comply with HIPAA and a lot of other, regulatory burdens, it's hard with the long healthcare sales cycles to bootstrap something, I would say. That's been my experience. But, you'll see people in healthcare with more consumer-facing technologies, less clinical technologies who can take that path. Overall, I think it's just important to get alignment of, the people you raise money from are becoming the long-term part of your team, and know that. And, be aligned with them as to what your goals are, what your values are. And to me, that's much more important than the type of money, is that you're raising money from people who are wanting to go on the same journey with you.
Yes, you're not just taking money from somebody who's going to give you money. You're
Right.
actually, because that is one of the problems. People are like, I finally found somebody to give me money. And so when you say to them, well, are all those things aligned? Are our values, objectives? They're like, they're going to give me money. That's probably a path towards destruction, isn't it?
There are going to be bumps in the road, right? And ups and downs and turns, and having people who are willing to go through those times with you and be supportive. Their role isn't always to be supportive. The role is to question you and help make you better. But you want that fundamental alignment at the end of the day. What's the problem we're trying to solve? And, do we believe in the same thing?
Yeah, it's interesting. The podcast, I've mentioned this before on the show, but Redox did a podcast with their VC person and the two founders, because they recently had to do some reductions. And it was interesting to see all three of them addressing not only their company, but they addressed the entire healthcare community by putting it out on a podcast of, why are we making these decisions? How are we focusing? And those kind of things. I think that's a great example of really good alignment between the VC and the owner. There's not a question there. It's just sort of a comment, but you've seen a lot of pitches to VC. What would you say is the mistake that you see made when people come before a venture capital firm and pitch for a partnership and money?
I'd say probably the most common pitch mistake is, having a technology looking for a problem. And you probably are a solution looking for a problem to solve. That, any of us can fall in love with the ideas we have and the technology we've built, but if you don't really understand the problem you're solving, and what is the market demand that I'm meeting, and what's the revenue model for a product, right? Because at the end of the day, we all have to come up with a sustainable business model that's going to support growth of a company. So, in general, it's hard, right? Because you're so close to it, but always being able to speak in sort of that, unit economics of, for the client, for the user, this is the problem I'm solving, and this is why they must have what I'm building, not it's a nice to have.
So there's a sense in which you probably hear a lot, if we build it, they will come. There's not really a good model for, hey, here's how we're going to help them to be successful. Here's how we're going to help them drive patient outcomes. Here's the demand that's already been generated around this type of product set, and those kind of things, I would assume.
Yeah, and the early days of value-based care, I think, were a good example of that. There are a lot of companies building solutions to help drive better outcomes for early ACOs and other value-based care models. But the economics weren't necessarily all figured out of what would make those, models work for the health system, much alone for the supporting technologies. So there were a lot of cycles around that of, I'm pitching better outcomes, but how does that tie back to the revenue and the savings?
Absolutely. So Lucie, so you talked a little bit about how you ended up being an entrepreneur, and you had the VC background. People might look at it and go, well, that's just a perfect fit. But there's so few female health tech entrepreneurs. Give us an idea. Were there any obstacles you had to overcome in order to get to where you're at today? And what would you say to maybe the next generation in terms of doing things today that will prepare them for that role?
Yeah, I think when I talk with sometimes clinicians or scientists who are interested in being entrepreneurs in healthcare, I do think actually having the clinical experience, I'll talk to med students sometime and they'll say, hey, should I just quit and go start a company? And I usually advise them, no, actually go out there and really understand what your colleagues in medicine are experiencing, because the ability to be empathetic when you're building technology is incredibly important. And I think that's been very important for us as a company to really understand the pain points and the priority of those pain points and sort of the, slog of the day-to-day in medicine. Sometimes you come in, you've got 40 patients to see, and at the end of the day, you actually want to go home and have dinner with your own family. And so I'll, repeat that to my team over and over. We can't build better technology that adds an hour to their day. We just can't. Nobody will use that because over time, they actually want to be able to go home at night. So I think, coming at it with that perspective of I'm going to go get some experience that will help me be able to better relate to those end users is one approach. Raising money, I'm pretty involved in female entrepreneurship organizations, and there's a big gap in terms of the amount of money that women raise as entrepreneurs versus men. And while I had worked in venture capital, I really didn't have connections into healthcare VCs, so that was a big obstacle to overcome, for sure. And you have to just be tenacious, be okay with being told no dozens, if not hundreds of times, and, be confident in what you believe in and your vision. And if you're really providing value, somebody else will see that and appreciate it and support you.
Yeah. Talk to me a little bit about networking and mentorship, right? So I hear a lot of people say, I can't find a mentor. I want a mentor, but I can't find a mentor. That's one thing. And then and just the value of the people that you've interacted with over the years and how they help you maybe today in the role, maybe even get you into the role you're in today.
Mm-hmm. I think one area that's overlooked is peer mentorship. That has been incredibly helpful to me. One of the first sort of fund money in was from a group called Village Capital, who has this really unique peer selection process around their investment strategy, which we were lucky to be selected. But it's a group of peers who I have stayed connected with because while we may be building different companies and different technologies, we're all to some degree living the same experience. And then later in the company, we were located at Georgia Tech at the technology accelerator there, and I would have lunch every Friday with the other CEOs. And that was probably the most helpful group of mentors who I have interacted with because, they could be a fintech company, a marketing tech company, but we all have the same issues, right? Employee issues, founder issues, investor issues, and sort of knowing it's not unique to you, that like, this is hard, everybody else is going through it, they come out the other side, to me was what was just super helpful in sort of getting up and doing it again the next day.
Yeah, those groups. It's interesting to me. There have been times where I've sat around with other CIOs, and people are like, "Oh, you get to talk to CIOs all the time." I'm like, "Yeah, you get to hear a part of the conversation on the podcast." Invariably, the best part of the conversation is the 15 minutes after we stop recording, because the guard comes down and they go, "Oh man, this change to HHS database from the CDC database has sent my team into a swirl." But and we end up sharing that stuff, which you're not sharing on the podcast. I don't know. We just don't do it. I don't know why that is. But yeah, it's those groups where you can be honest for, people sharing the same kind of problems. You can be honest, non-competitive, and just help one another out is phenomenal. How can people get more information about your company, and how can they follow you?
So the company is Rimidi.com, RIMIDI.com. We are really active on Twitter, on LinkedIn. So, follow us at those two locations, and you can follow me on Twitter, just my whole name at Lucie Ide.
Just out of curiosity, Rimidi, how'd you come up with the name?
One of those creative, uncomfortable branding exercises, but it's a play on the word remedy, but something that we could own and sort of grow into.
Yeah, it's hard to name a company, isn't it? I mean, it sounds like it's easy, but there's so many things that go into it.
Absolutely, yeah.
Well, Lucie, thank you again for your time. I really appreciate it. And that's all for this week. Don't forget to sign up for Clip Notes. Send an email to clipnotes@thisweekinhealthit.com. Special thanks to our sponsors, our channel sponsors, VMware, Starbridge Advisors, Galen Healthcare, HealthLyrics, Sirius Healthcare, ProTalent Advisors, and HealthNext for choosing to invest in developing the next generation of health leaders. This show is a production of This Week in Health IT. For more great content, check out our website, thisweekhealth.com, or the YouTube channel. If you want to support the show, best way to do that is share it with a peer. Actually, another way to do that, sign up for Clip Notes and forward Clip Notes onto them and say, this is a great show, I'm getting a lot out of it. Please check back every Tuesday, Wednesday, and Friday for more great content. Thanks for listening. That's all for now.